Well, good morning, everybody. Our attention again today is going to be on the last of a series of big storm systems that have hit the western United States. And the good news is that this will be kind of the last big push of the kind of atmospheric rivers that have been originating from as far west as Japan and also sometimes right out of the Central Pacific, like from Hawaii, the so-called Pineapple Express. It's all about topography in the west as the moisture comes in. And you can see here the mountains that are just north of LA just taking on the brunt of that flow, almost hitting them perpendicularly. And as a result, there's going to be a tremendous amount of rainfall and eventually snow in this area. Same thing for parts of the Sierra Nevada mountains. We combine that with all of the wind that the West has endured over the last about 48 hours, and we can see here that they're still across California on poweroutage.us tracking about a little over 500,000 customers without power. This was almost up to 1 million last night. If we kind of click on the state, we can see those locations that are still being tracked this morning. So 566,502 without, and it's been pretty rough here in and around San Francisco, points to the north and into the Central Valley. Now, broader picture of what's going on, we actually had two large systems yesterday that we continued to monitor. There's another one that was developing here over the southeast, and over the weekend this one did produce severe weather in parts of southern Georgia and Florida, including 3 tornado reports and a pretty nasty squall line. But as we just take this back to yesterday, I did want to point out broad area of precipitation and cloud that was stretched right here across parts of the central United States into the mid-south and southeast. And we did see, if we kind of look at the very end of this, you can see some of the dust getting blown around here in parts of New Mexico and Texas, including what looks like a plume of dust that got blown off of the kind of the Gulf Coast down here. But these lows were pretty powerful and pretty potent and packed quite a punch with wind. In fact, this morning still the winds are blowing pretty strong throughout California and also here throughout parts of the southeast as this low begins to rapidly intensify as well. Elsewhere around the country, things are a bit quieter, and it's really just right here in our kind of two coasts, the southeast and then the west, that are really taking the brunt of the flow this morning. So let's kind of get an idea on the precipitation we've seen over the weekend. This is the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation, and these numbers are just going to continue to rise all day across this section of Southern California. So I am expecting some pretty significant flooding here. We've been watching this now for a while, so this will be kind of the end of it. But you can also see where the moisture spread out. The stronger storms that started off, last week in Texas, just rolling across the south here. And again, we did see some more severe weather over the weekend in Georgia and Florida. And outside of that, pretty sharp line to the north of this. In fact, I was in Nashville over the weekend, and all we had was some cloud cover. But I talked to a friend and colleague out of Memphis, and then also my boss's boss is in Memphis, and Mr. Tarsi, and he texted and said, hey, we've had rain all day. This is going to continue to add to the Mississippi here. A lot of the lower basin picking up good moisture. The Mississippi this morning I checked, by the way, is still about 23 feet above low stage, so pretty remarkable recovery in quite a short amount of time. But if we add this to the last week, okay, just notice where's the only real change has been. Here's the last 72 hours, here's the last week. So you can notice that it's really only been the two massive systems that have hit California that have delivered significant precipitation across the country. So we've got a lot of places that have grabbed already 10 inches, and we're expecting quite a bit more. Same thing for snow. Taking a look at the last 72 hours of snowfall. Now remember, this only goes through, in fact, let's shrink that up so you can see the color bar. Whoop. This only goes through 5 p.m. West Coast time last night. No, actually 4 p.m. last night. Take note that we had over the weekend several locations that picked up 2+ feet of snow. And don't forget, this also hit the front range of the Rockies, as we talked about on Friday. Right along the front range is where we had just really, really heavy snow amounts. This was terrible for travel in this area. And I did like seeing this. I love seeing this snow getting up into Montana, and I have a good story for Montana going forward with another kick of snow coming through. This has been one of our driest areas, which I'll show you in a few moments. But if we look at that snowfall season-to-date percent of normal, I just like to keep an eye on this one as we go forward. When this gets updated around 9 o'clock this morning, I do expect to see some nice changes over here in parts of the West. But one of the things that's really just defined this season is just take a look at this whole north interior of the U.S. and this stripe right in through here. Despite good lake effect early, we still have a big section of the Ohio Valley back toward where the Ohio and Mississippi, Missouri come together that have missed out on decent snows, and same thing for parts, the whole of the northern plains and upper Midwest. If we take a look only at the west, this is what our basin average snowwater content is, and this is through February 4th. when this gets updated here over the next few days, we will see significant improvements here. What I'm still concerned about is the Pacific Northwest mountain ranges, including the Cascades and the Northern Rockies, the Olympic Mountains. This all needs to have more snow getting added to it before we get to the end of this season. So we will need to be watching for the evolution of the polar branch of the jet to start to help out here. So just as an idea, though, I want to show you very quickly what things looked like a year ago at this point, and notice how much better of a year last year was at eliminating what had been a 4-year-long drought across big sections of the West. Biggest change year over year, though, in my opinion, is right in this part of Montana. Just again, watch that area as I go from 2023 to 2024. We've got to see more get into this area. But given the snow that did come into the Colorado Basin, I did want to update you that they saw a little bump in their snowpack right in through here just over the past couple of days, but we're still a little behind average overall. So we need to continue to see these numbers improve as we work our way through this kind of next couple of months, and that kind of ends the snowy season for much of the West. So this morning, about 6:20, sorry, I got a little bit of a late jump. Didn't get in until about midnight last night from Nashville. So 6:20, fog, dense fog throughout much of the northern plains, central plains. But then the attention really goes to the west, where there's still winter storm warnings out for the Sierra Nevada, into Nevada, down here in Arizona. Flood watches, high wind warning. It's all kind of hidden under the flood watch through here, but pretty nasty go of it again today. Outside of that, we have some stronger winds being advised for down here in Louisiana and this part of South Carolina. And this is not to ignore the heavy snows that could be coming on the northern side of Idaho Snake River Valley, which are desperately needed. Thinking about those winds, I just want to play this out for you. This is maximum accumulated wind gusts. I'm doing it pretty quickly here, but we're going out all the way till noon on Wednesday. And the low that's going to curl up just off the coast, the one that brought some stronger winds over the weekend to the southeast, it might have gusts that approach hurricane strength, even though it is not a hurricane. But we're expecting more strong winds in Northern California today, and also in pockets driven by the mountains in California. But take a look at much of the Great Basin area. Very, very strong winds through the beginning of this week, and some of it will emerge into the plains. We'll have to talk about how this whole system evolves into the plains when you see the comparison between the high-res European and the high-res GFS in just a moment. But first, I'd like to show you the NAM. This is kind of our hour-by-hour forecast from one of our better models that we've got in the near term at high resolution. And as I just play this out through Tuesday, getting into Wednesday, it'll be the slow evolution of that low over the next 50 hours or so, coming out of California. Just look at that stream of moisture there. Coming out of California, evolving into Arizona, Utah, out of Nevada, getting into the Central Rockies. And then it will emerge here. So that flow just brought it in, and it's going to come out somewhere and develop low here, which is why I like seeing the snow that could be on the back side of this for parts of Montana. Okay, from there, let's just show you one of the symptoms of the atmosphere that I would tell you needs to be corrected. A moment ago, I mentioned we need the polar jet. And so what the map you're looking at now shows is that since December 1st, we're looking at jet stream level winds. And this is a vector anomaly. So when you look at this, we see, wow, look how much stronger than normal this part of the subtropical jet has been. But if you look right in through here, you're like, wait a minute, that was going backwards? Like, no, this is just telling us that when you look at the wind vector, compare it to average, the flow through this area has been so weak, it appears to be backwards. So you know what I'm saying? So instead of having strong flow that dives in like this, which can really deliver a big winter punch, we've just not had it. Well, what I also don't see here is I also don't see the strong signals in the North Atlantic to really drive any sort of stronger signal toward cooler weather across the eastern half of North America. So that's where we've been, and I just want to show you the subtropical jet continues to be the most dominant factor. It begins over here in, this is the Sahara, and it goes across, it goes south of Europe, and it goes into the Middle East, and it comes across Asia, and it leaves Japan, and it comes across the Pacific, and then it just wants to stay across the southern tier of the U.S. The polar branch just dies. It comes out, and there's just nothing to be spoken of for it. So what we end up getting out of this is playing through Tuesday into Wednesday. We'll watch the nose of that produce a system in the midsection of the country that will be of note to watch, but then there's no other support following it. So we just don't get these northern tier systems like we did a year ago. And as the jet retracts this weekend, back over toward Japan, the flow becomes much weaker across the west, and as we discussed, a ridge builds there. So what this ridge will ultimately do, out there about 6, 7, 8 days from now, then lasting through day 10, day 12, is it will start to displace some cooler air back into central North America. But the subtropical jet just continues to scream here, which is going to keep the very southern tier of the United States wetter while we go for a drier week or so across most of the rest of the country. Now, where I think this is most concerning to me is just to look back since the beginning of the new year at who's not been able to get into this flow. And it just really screams at me to see that parts of Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP, this is just an area that has been left completely out of this flow, and it has yet to get a good system in there. So we either have to see the subtropical jet go away or have to see it make a hard turn in here rather than staying south before we could hope to return the right setup to drop the pressure, bring in Gulf moisture, and just hammer this area late. Now, I will be honest with you. I just anecdotally know that there have been years in the past where winter's been like this in the northern plains, and then we get into March and April, and it just makes a shift north, and all of a sudden all of our winter comes on late. It's a possibility, and we'll take a look at that possibility with some new long-range data in a moment here. But as it stands, another way to look at that last 30 days percent of normal, we just have some places up here in the upper Midwest, northern plains that are like 0 to 10%. Take note also of this part of New Mexico and down into western Texas, very dry. And it is important to note that there's this stripe from this part of Georgia that runs right along the coast here, up through the Carolinas, that's missed out on some of this precipitation as well. But a lot of this is being fixed right now. Okay, so comparing the models, GFS left, European right. We just walk through Monday into Tuesday, and this is where that deep low moves through by Wednesday morning, afternoon, and evening through the Rockies, and it does emerge. So again, you just followed the flow of it. It comes right in through here in both models. Now take note, they are trying to put down some snow, and I love every bit of it. But there's a lot of warm air out ahead of this, which means all the way up to, my goodness, this is southern Manitoba, western Ontario. We're looking at a rain event here, not a snow event. It is February the 8th, and we've got so much mild air in place we're unable to get that snow in that area. So playing through Thursday into Friday, this kind of drags this weaker front through the midsection of the country. If this high pressure system gets stronger, then this band of rain will be larger late this week. But as it stands, this is what we've got, and there's a decent chance at some precip coming through this whole sector of the country. Now you notice it's not so pronounced in the GFS, and that's largely because it doesn't have the same strength of high pressure over the southeast. But this is Friday morning, playing through the early weekend Saturday. We have another little system coming over the Rocky Mountains here. Models have been teasing for this weekend for something to either pop out here or pop out there in the flow. The agreement is terrible right now in the models. I mean, notice watch the GFS on the left. It just builds a system that tries to come up in the Ohio Valley. We need that guy. We need that system to come through there. It's even trying to produce some snow from Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. The GFS, which produces it now, what was the European that had it last night? And now the Europeans lost that system early next week. It puts it down over the southeast with a little clipper that sneaks in out of the Dakotas toward Illinois. Just two entirely different scenarios as we work out there into next week. But we know we don't really trust these models out that far. We just look for what they're showing, and that's why we look at the ensemble averages. So let's go ahead and see the totals here, and then we'll look at those ensemble averages. Okay, just playing through the next 7 days. We're going to park it right there. This is total accumulated precip. Love seeing this. We've got to get this system as it comes over California to get into this area and then give California a pretty sizable break. So if you look right now, this is just your next 7 days. This is what the GFS says for the same time period. There you go. Let's compare them real quick. Euro, GFS. I see halfway decent consistency in this, and that's good. All right, what about the snowfall side of it? We could easily add up as the system moves the rest of the way over the Sierra Nevada mountains, which have been snowing all night in sections. We could still see the possibility of another couple of feet here, but then a lot of snow in parts of the Intermountain West and Great Basin, which is needed. But I'm looking at these snows that are coming up into this part of the Canadian prairie, out of Montana, North Dakota, getting into Manitoba and this part of Ontario. Now, again, there's going to be a hard rain snow line right here with this. But this is the 7 days from the Euro. Here's the 7 days from the GFS. Now, models keep hinting at doing some sort of system in through here. It was really strong in the European last night, but it's out this morning. But the GFS has got something. I need you to look at this and go, all right, we need to watch it all week to see if something really manifests itself there. What I am interested in seeing is the consistency hitting that really dry area here between the two models on the forecast. All right. Okay, we know that there's no snow there right now. We've had such mild air that we've melted it, and if you're curious, this is what the last 15 days has looked like compared to normal. We've sent our cold air to Alaska. It's been in Greenland. The jet extension has just prevented high amplitude flow over North America, and that's what we end up getting. We just end up leaving the coldest air farther to the north. Now, before we see where that could go, because we still have more mild air coming that could melt more of this snow, I want to at least talk about those probability maps. So let's look on the really dry side of this first. This is, whoops, we got a new model run. Let's get that oriented back up here for you. There we go. This is the outlook for who has the highest chance of going less than 1/10 of an inch. And what you notice is it's anchored in the western and central plains over the next 10 days. If we step this up to a 1/2 inch, who's got the best chance of staying under a 1/2 inch? There's a pretty broad swath right in through here that kind of gets back into this part of Texas into Mexico that's quite dry. Also see there's pockets of the Canadian prairie that miss out. We flip it over to the wetter side of it, and best probability in the next 10 days of grabbing an inch. So we're highest still in the west where the systems continue today. And then we also see down here in parts of the mid-south, southeast, best chance at getting some moisture. And the wettest areas, there's the chance for 2 inches, and we'll keep going up here to 4, just to kind of get an idea of the heaviest rainfall we're still going to be continuing to watch. Let's flip this over to the winter side of it and take a look at the best chance at grabbing an inch in the next 10 days. Okay. Now from there, just wanted to mention, there is something coming out here next week that I've got to watch. I don't have a lot of confidence in it, but for some places in here that have not had any snow, we got to see what comes into this area. Best chance, for 3 inches. Now we can see that desperately needed snow coming into this area. This is the best chance at 6. Love it. And we'll go up to 1 foot. Okay, we've seen the probabilities. Let's now talk about this pattern. I showed it to you in the jet stream earlier, but as we work our way through the middle of the week, that's that system that comes out right there. Got to get this guy to form. Large ridge up the East Coast. We then play this out into this next weekend, and this will be what I'll watch. You'll notice that by the day before Valentine's Day, let's just go to Valentine's Day. Look at the ridge that starts to build up into Alaska. Remember I was talking about a lot last week? Trough, 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 trough. And every time you see something like this happen, we tend to see heights increase across the northern latitudes. And we're getting a sense of that happening in this area. Now, what have I been talking about? In order to get that cold air out of these two places, these storehouses of cold air, you've got to ridge them out. And one ridge is building in here, another one's building in there, and we're starting to get a sense of that colder air coming down. Now, is this a good negative North Atlantic oscillation signal? It is sort of there. What I wouldn't give to get this to get farther in toward Quebec or the Hudson Bay and drop that trough that's here, I want it back over there. And then you produce a big East Coast system. But as it stands, this is going to give us a new look past the middle of the month, which we've kind of been hinting at that happening. So first on the precipitation side of it, because that doesn't really happen until about day, when was it? The 16th, 17th? Most of week 2 is drier across a big section of the country. It's in all 3 models. With the subtropical jet being the dominant factor, that's where you keep the wetter conditions. But it looks like after that, we start to get some sort of shift overall. So let's see what it does to the temperatures. Here's today's highs compared to average. Getting into Tuesday and Wednesday. Whoops, look at the middle of this week. Temperatures here, they're working their way towards 60 degrees in Iowa, Nebraska. We then get out there toward Thursday, still very, very mild. Working our way into Friday and Saturday. I mean, this is the reason why this system's not going to be able to, let's just get there, bring the snow into this section of Minnesota. It's just too mild. The west stays cooler. The southeast hangs on to the cooler air longest for them. Most of the rest of the east, though, already starts to warm up by middle and late week, and all that warmth translates to the east by Sunday. Now, day 5 through 10, the newest GFS model is starting to show, look at this, see the warmer air here? So then day 10 through 15 lets that colder air that was in place, it just begins to migrate. And as it comes out, the GFS was the first to pick up on this. But we've got cooler air here, cooler air in the plains, cooler air in the southeast. Now, this will be cooler air day 10. This will be cooler air right after the middle of the month of February. So this is not like cold air in January, but it's still a colder shot of air. And the European model finally started to agree with this in the 0Z run. This is day 5 through 10, so compare it to this map. Remember the day 10 through 15 did this. Watch what the Euro finally did. It finally started to show day 10 through 15, the colder signal starting to come in and then widespread across the south and southeast. So finally some agreement showing up here in the longer range as we watch this just kind of muddle along all weekend. Okay, I've got a lot of new long range stuff for you. And if you get a sense out of my lack of confidence, then you read my tone quite well. And it's largely because of the MJO. The MJO stalling out in phase 7 and just really a weak tropical signal means that I don't have anything that's moving around enough or at high enough amplitude to give me any sort of sense of when and if we could really reverse everything and start to deliver moisture to those places that I've mentioned today need it. The longer range forecast even doesn't do a single favor. It just says the MJO stays in phase 7 and then the ensemble average collapses it into null space. And the thing about this is if it does that motion, it just removes some sense of predictability. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It takes away something I could use, a catalyst for change in the atmosphere if it just collapses. The tropics just lose their signal. And then you saw what I showed you at the beginning. We don't have a strong signal coming out of the polar regions. And even though there just could be some sort of linkage past mid-month of the polar vortex in the stratosphere linking up with this, I am so not confident about it that I'm not going to make a story that isn't there. So this is what I'm going to give you again. This was the CPC's update. I showed it to you on Friday, and I just want to tell you why it looks like this. When we lose those other signals, either something out of the poles or something out of the tropics, we go to kind of the mainstay of what's controlling the pattern this winter, which is El Niño. And this is the temperature outlook for the month of February. This is the precipitation outlook. And this is the same thing that just got released from the European, taking it all the way to mid-February or mid-March. So this is mid-February to mid-March. And you see something similar, right? A little drier signal here, drier in the northwest. If it's wet, it's across the south. And the Euro's like, yeah, that's what I got. Strong subtropical flow on repeat because nothing's changing in the tropics just yet. So what I have to ask is, how El Niño-like is this? And El Niño is still there. And this El Niño is still strong. It's fading, but it told you it's going to fade forever. It's going to take forever to slow down. And if you look back, I'm going to just do something with you. I'm going to take every moderate, every strong, and every very strong El Niño event, which, by the way, 23-24 has been categorized as a strong, okay? All of these events, and just wrap them up and show you what happened in February. This is what you got. This would be let's shrink it up so we can see that bar. There you go. This would be the composite of all of those years, February precipitation anomalies. So look, wetter south, drier Midwest, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, drier in parts of the Northwest. And guess what? That's exactly what the Euro was saying, and that's exactly what the government was saying. If we come back to that same map, whoops, not that one, I'll show you that one in a second, and I go back here and say, well, if that's precipitation, what did the temperatures do? And on the temperature side of it, there we go, we tended to be more mild across a big sector of the country here and a little bit cooler late, or down south too. And remember, that's almost exactly what we've got. Sorry about that. All right, so CPC went full-blown El Niño pattern for the rest of February. Now, just thinking about that, knowing where the MJO is, I'm not going to make a big argument against it. I do know there's colder air coming after the middle of the month here. But how well will it be able to do the monthly statistic of this whole area being above average? That'll be the question. So let's go back and start thinking about this differently. I told you earlier I don't have a lot of confidence in spring just yet. And this is one of the big reasons why. I grabbed every El Niño event that we just looked at and said, well, what did they do in March and April? And what you're looking at here is every year that this El Nino was present and slowly fading, what the temperature anomalies look like. I mean, if you look at this, it's very hard to pick up on a consistent signal, right? In other words, El Ninos have different flavors. And it's the same with precipitation. So when you look at this, these colors represent wetter than average. The blues are, excuse me, forgive me. The warmer colors are drier. The bluer colors are wetter. Now, which one of these years do we seek out as an analog? Well, I'm just going to be honest with you. If this is what the ocean temperatures look like today, okay, really the only one of those years that looks something close to it is 2016. February 4th on 2016, here's February 3rd on 2024. So this is probably the closest analog match just using ocean temperatures. There were other things about 16 that were different. And by the way, the El Nino in 16 was stronger. But okay, let's just do it and say, what does it give us? It gives us this pattern down here for precipitation in March and April, which is pretty active in a lot of severe weather, but drier Appalachian Mountains in New England. And it would give us a very mild March and April compared to average. Now, March and April are transition months. The temperatures are going to flop all over the place. But I have no confidence in this at all. I just don't. So if I turn to the models, this was just released this morning. This was the old March, April, May forecast for precipitation from the European model. And this is the new. And they really didn't change too much. Now, what I'm going to be doing later today is fully analyzing the new European model. I'm going to show it to you quickly, but you can see that April, May, June, July, and then June, July, August, that the European model's demise of El Nino, which looks something like this, okay? It's got a pretty wide spread, but probably by mid to late summer, just bringing this down to neutral, okay? If that is the case and that's what it does, then you end up getting kind of a dividing line in your precipitation. I'm sorry, let's come back here. Where throughout this year, if you're in the Western Plains, west of about, the 95th meridian, that's not really a good, well-drawn line, but that's where I start to see the drier risks showing up. I mean, that's just what the model's saying. We're going to have to analyze it and do a better job of thinking about it. But it does mimic what the March, April, May outlook looked like from last month's NMME. This will update later this week. And just thinking about it, it also kind of mimics what the government said as well. So where we'll be watching for the risk of dry conditions building will be here later based on these analyses. That's what we're going to be talking about as we work our way through some new data that's coming out right now. By the way, the temperature pattern for March, April, May, according to the CPC, looks something like this. So are we looking at a mild spring? It's a possibility. If we use 2016 as an analog, yes. If you use the current model updates, yeah. But remember, even if I say mild spring, that doesn't mean you can't have a cold week in late April, early May that brings in another frost. You can have a mild spring with a brief cool down, and frosts like that can be highly impactful for all of agriculture. I just need you to know what I'm watching. From there, I want to take you to one other thing to think about. As we watch this 3-month sliding window of ocean temperatures, the newest European model, which still keeps a weaker La Nina coming in, pulls a lot of warm water into the Gulf of Alaska and still keeps the warm water here. And that will be a major point of discussion because if there's going to be significant drought risk throughout the center ag belt, having warm water here reduces that drought risk. If this is wrong and this shows up colder and this La Nina is bigger, in other words, everywhere I just put these stripes is colder than what the model suggests, then it is the western United States that tends to have the cooler season and drought is much higher risk in the midsection of the country. That's the rule of thumb just to be thinking about here. Okay, we got to finish this one up by going globally. I'm going to look at temperatures first and we're going to talk precip. Interestingly enough, while the warmer air arrives in Alaska, we still hang on to it in Greenland. And that's why it's going to take a while to punch out the mild air over the next 10 days. But take a look at Scandinavia compared to the rest of Europe. And if you look at what's going on there in terms of moisture, it's pretty wet across Europe and all the way across Russia as well. But what I'd like to finish with here is what's going on in South America. So if we zoom in there and just take a quick look at total precip. Remember, the discussion has been at a couple of weeks of dryness in Argentina, mostly concerned about what it was doing down here in Buenos Aires and these northern growing areas. But in the middle, we had a lot of rain leading up to this drier time period. It got hot last week. And we said that February 8th was when this front was going to start to advance out of the south to bring in the moisture. Well, playing it forward, here comes that front. This February 7th, watch, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. And you see that the models are really wanting to return that moisture back into Argentina, just ending this risk of continual dry weather. To the north, this is pretty normal rainfall, but the only spot that's dry is southern Brazil in the next 10 days or so. So you think about that and compare it to the data that was released on Friday in Mato Grosso. They are above average and above last year on the harvesting of soybeans right now, but I think they're getting out all of the stuff that was planted very early. I would estimate, and this is just based on the narrative I carried, that we'll probably see this line do something like this over the next few weeks. But the Safrinha corn did a decent job at catching up in Mato Grosso lately as well. So they were behind on that, but you can see they're back closer to on pace. So what this all really boils down to is one last thing to discuss, and that is, does the Safrinha crop get a good start? And across most of Brazil's center-west, center, and then eastern growing areas, the answer is yes. February looks to have decent rains. But just like we talked about, going into March and April, the models are suggesting an early shutdown of the monsoon in this area. And if you look at a 3-month average and go out there to, let's click this a couple times, there we go, April, May, and June, which is when the crop finishes, the models continue to show the potential for an early shutdown on Safrinha. So we'll watch it. We'll keep discussing it. I'm going to dig deeper into this new long-range data later today. Until then, have a good rest of your day. Thanks.